as it is still portals. It's still fun with portals, but some of the nature of the portals themselves have shifted. Where there were two types of teleportation beforehand, there was the kind where you just opened a door and you were just kind of like opened a door and fell through, and then the other one where you downloaded yourself Willy Wonka style into like a stream of random bits and pieces and then reassembled like a computer image is not that way anymore. That's not how it works. It's always opening doors, gateways, portals. Or the smaller portals, which are portholes. And synergies with other magic, it tends to be rupturing was from its conception. There were some people that tried to find ways to, let's say, monopolize its offensive capability. And you have to keep in mind that magic is not a science. It operates on different rules than the reality that you understand. It's symbolism and theme. It's not meant to be a scientific process. So you'd think, well, if I can splinter through a wall, why can't I splinter through a person? Well, it's because they have souls in them. And frankly, rupturing is not a magic meant to kill, not a magic meant to injure. You can injure people with it, but that tends to be the side effect of moving objects from point A to point B. If you move an anvil over somebody's head and then it drops, well, it's not the fault of the rupturing that they're going to get hurt. It's the fault of gravity. It had no business pulling down that anvil on their head to begin with. So rupturing takes advantage of the swift movement from one point to another and has unmatched versatility in the battlefield. A synergy that does really work well is attunement. Rupturing is a magic of returning to places that you've been before, of scouting places that you've been before. And attunement is about understanding the nature, the frequency of the places that you have been before. So if you successfully memorize the frequency of a person, you can use scrying to scry where that person is, which is not generally a function of rupturing alone. It has to be paired with something else. Although theoretically, you could also pair that with any sort of divine mark that would also allow you to divine their immediate location. And you could be familiar enough with them that you can scry to where they are. Rupturing requires you to be able to establish an entrance and an exit. Without either of those two, you don't have a portal. Let's see. Does the rework have anything to do, bring anything to the table with regards to interacting with fractures? Fractures are, as I'm sure some of you are aware, or if you're not, fractures are essentially where Emiya encroaches in on Idalos, or maybe Idalos encroaches in on Emiya. Either way, they're in their own way a kind of a portal, a doorway, if you will, of thin membrane. If anybody has seen Stranger Things, imagine all of the portals to the Upside Down as fractures, places where the walls between the realms are weak enough that you could just literally reach through and get to the other side. Not that you'd want to. Much like the Upside Down, Emiya is super crazy to be in if you're not dreaming. If you're physically there, bad things can happen, especially if you're physically there and you're a mage. Magic is wild and unbound in there. What you use is ether. Ether fuels your magic. And Emiya is all ether, so if you can imagine lighting a match in a room full of gas, but it's chaos and it's uncontrolled. Mages don't last long in Emiya when they are drawn in there. It's not wise to use your spark when you're surrounded by so much food. So, what was my favorite ability to work on? The craziest way that I would use it? I'd have to say that my favorite ability in Rupturing is probably the nailing. or the nail. It is a technique in which you establish an ingress before you establish an egress. So you establish an entrance before you establish. Do I have it? I have it backwards. No, I don't. You establish an entrance. Exit. You establish an entrance before you establish an exit. Your job, the only thing that you do is simply link the entrance to the exit. So let's say you prepare a cunning trap. You are about to walk into battle, say, but you have time to prepare the battlefield. So you stack up a bunch of rocks on a very precarious ledge in the middle of the battle, and then of course you establish the nailing just beneath where those rocks might fall. In the middle of the battle, you open a portal, hurl something in order to knock those rocks loose. Then open up the nail. All of a sudden, wherever you open that portal, boulders are hurtling through at your opponent because they've fallen from one place, and now they're just flying out from the other. Now imagine applying push and pull on those portals. If you needed a safe place to get back to very quickly that was just outside of the battlefield, again, establish the nail, put a pull on the egress, and you can suck yourself through into the ingress just like that. You're gone in an instant. Or you can use pull on the other side, suck whatever's on the other side through to this side. Depending on how you utilize it, it's a really cool way to game your portals in the right place to cause maximum damage or peril. Now, they have to be places that portal would be able to actually exist, and they have to be places that you visited. So like in a volcano is not generally possible unless you could withstand enough heat to get close enough to actually establish a portal there. Otherwise, that's not really generally a thing that you do. Teleport a portal and have lava just pour out on everybody. Although that does sound cool. Somebody did try to do that once. Okay. There's a lot of talking. Oh man. Okay. I should have just been scrolling down. All of the questions got updated here. Here we go. So, what led me to believe that rupturing needed? Well, when I was originally establishing rupturing, there were a lot of magics on my plate. I was convinced to outsource it to someone else, and I handed them my notes, and they took it in a different direction, or a different direction than I intended. Not that the work was necessarily bad. It just went into a different direction, a more scientific direction, one that utilized math and exact coordinates and the sundial, and so much of it was based around the principles of exact measurement, and that's not what magic is about. You have science. And alchemy certainly uses exact measurements. Alchemy is where science meets the raw properties of magic. How do you measure something that is entirely thematic? How do you measure a miracle? Magic is in itself a function of domain. And domain is never exact. Domain is more broad stroke. Also, there was a certain problem with sundials essentially making travel pointless. So we'd have a player who was in, let's say, like 4 different cities a season, and you could never really figure out where they were going to be, and they always just teleported out when they were, and they could always just teleport out when they were in trouble and be an entire world away. And there is still some aspect of that here, but what we drew back on was the scale. The idea is that travel is necessary for rupturing, but it's not a completely, let's see, where am I going with this? Rupturing is not meant to be a replacement for travel. It's meant to be a supplement. Rupturing is used for places that you return to. Rupturing brings you to the familiar. Rupturing brings you back. but you use your own feet to bring you forward. A rule that has been maintained in Rupturing is that you have to have been somewhere first, or at least in that general area, in order to teleport there. So you couldn't imagine what Uthaldria looked like and suddenly you're there. No, you need to actually go through the travel. You need to understand the journey of why. You need to actually take that path, and then you can teleport. After you've already taken the journey, the magic essentially says, all right, you've done that. Now you can go back. But if you imagine Rupturing is in a lot of games, video games, there's fast travel features. But in a lot that I have played, you first have to explore the reason before have to explore the region before you can use the fast traveling feature. Rupturing is a lot like that. Rupturing is a magic that has its own personality and its own purpose. It feels, and what it wants to do is to explore and to always keep moving. And portals are really generally very small movement. You make one and then you skip all of the journey. Rupturing wants you to journey. It wants you to travel. It wants you to be in motion. And so it wouldn't, as a magic, it wouldn't shoehorn itself to being in a position where it would never experience that kind of travel, which is why Rupturers are usually the most well-traveled of any of the mages. The more places they are, the more possibilities they have for exploration. All right, following number 6. What do you feel these changes best improve upon from a player standpoint? Oh, from a player standpoint, I think Rupturing is a lot more cohesive now. There's a lot more that has been made clear within the magic itself, the way that it works, terminology for an entrance and an exit, ingress and egress. You have the evolution of portals. Now portals are, with the exception of the Rend, is the different kinds of portals are just an aspect of magic itself. When I design magics, I decide first, what does this magic do at its core base and how is it getting better? What does it do at novice level? What does it do at competent? What does it do at expert? What does it do at master? And then make sure that it does those things and does those things well. Then I asked myself, all right, if I had this magic and I was exploring as a mage, what kind of techniques would I come up with to expand its influence, to test its limits? And that's where the techniques come in. They're not meant to be, well, I mean, of course your next technique would be a bigger portal. You're a rupturer. No, that's usually just wrapped into the magic itself. The magic itself is about opening portals, and you get better at it as time goes on. But how you use those portals and different aspects of portals, that's where the techniques come in. And I think that from a player standpoint, there's a lot more options of what to do with Rupturing to be creative, and it's a lot more clear as a magic. It has its personality restored. How far can one rupture? Well, at maximum distance, and that would be for a beacon, which is a master level portal, of which there can only be, I believe, 1 or 2 ever established by the Rupturer. A beacon, you could travel from, say, Rinmir to Ivorian. Which is about the max distance. I'm still playing with as things go, it might get a little bit farther, but there are these special portals that you get when you are a master called beacons, where you essentially take a piece of your soul with the spark and you suffuse it into a location, and it becomes your beacon. And your beacon you can call yourself back to from almost anywhere at its maximum distance, which is much farther than even the farthest portals can reach. It isn't a magic that's going to take you from one end of the world to the other, not unless you're chaining beacon portals and with a group of mages. but it absolutely can get you from city to city. It could get you theoretically past certain channels of the sea. Depending on where you are, it can almost make travel pointless, depending on if you've already done the travel in the first place. Um, and that's really its long range capabilities. But what's cooler about Rupturing now is that it's more personalized. There are more things you can do with it in a thread that don't require you to go halfway across the world. All right. Does it truly depend on if the person has been there before inside of the country? I just answered that, actually. Cool. It does actually depend. Again, you need to understand the location and the journey that it took to get there before you can circumvent it. Can anything prevent an exit from forming? Wards, etc. Yes. You cannot open a portal in a physical object. Exceptions exist to this. You can splinter past an object. You can open up little like windows where you can see through objects, but a portal must exist within a space that does not have anything in it at the moment. So you might think that your opponent is actually summoning a portal, like a portal beneath their own feet, and you might be worried, what if they just open a portal beneath my feet? The answer is they won't. You might step into a portal, but they can't open one directly beneath your feet because your feet are connected to the ground, and the ground is already a solid object, and there's no room for the portal to actually open where your feet are touching the ground. Sky stepping, so most portals that you actually see that look like they're on the ground are actually mere centimeters or millimeters above the ground because they're just simply not on it. Also, there is a ward in ensorceling called a stitch. Stitches reinforce the quality of the air. Essentially, much like a stitch, they just prevent a portal from opening. They make the world, they make the area, that location, too impermeable. And depending on the quality of the well that's used within the ward is essentially about how much strain it can take before a tear might actually happen. So a very small, like a very basic well wouldn't be able to stop like an expert or a master rupturer. They're simply too strong. They would tear past those defenses. Whereas a high quality well might stop them, and it might also ward like an entire wing of a castle. Wells are not, high quality wells are not come by, and they always come from fractures, and fractures are filled with mind-numbingly terrifying danger. Necromancers know this very well. Because they need the wells. So it's not something that you'll see a lot of, but generally anybody that's in the know, the right royalty, they'll probably try to have jail cells that are warded against, probably try to throne rooms and other areas of importance so that rupturers don't just scry their way, like look through its small window into the throne room, see the king is there, open up a portal, throw the weapon, kill the king, and they're gone. Because beforehand, the magic could really just let you do that. That's a thing that could happen at any point in time, and everyone lived in terror. Now there are, well, not officially, but when ensorceling is done, there will be ways to defend against it. All right, where can I not port to? You can't port, well, there's a lot of places that you can port to, actually. There are a lot of places where you shouldn't port yourself, but there are a lot of places that you can. You can't port yourself into a solid object. Again, you can't open a portal in there, so you can't really port yourself there. You can't port yourself or open a portal within an area that has been warded. You can't usually, and this is moving into question 12, you can't usually open a portal into EMEA. That's actually an overstepping, or like that's actually an overstepping consequence. Is a translocation rupture or a tear. If you, I believe it's a heavy overstepping. If you mess up bad enough, you might accidentally rupture the space between worlds and step into Amiya. Again, not a thing that you ever want to do, because once you're in there, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to get out. The rupturing overstepping consequences are at random. So it's not like you could immediately say, oh, wait a minute, I actually back. Like those portals end. And if you're like, well, I'll just use my beacon, I'll recall to that. No, you won't, because you're in an entirely other world, and that makes distance quite considerable between you and your beacon. You can't get out. You can teleport into Amiya. You can't do it on purpose, and doing so would be disastrous. Once again, match room full of gas. If we take a sample of 100 people, how many on an average know rupture? I assume we're talking about know of rupturing. And I think that largely depends on where you are. In cities where magic is a lot more accepted, you'd have a higher probability of people knowing what it is. In lesser known places or spread out villages or places that haven't had contact as much with that stuff, there might be less people. What you often find, and this is more of a cultural note when you're role playing, is that most people won't know it by that name. They won't know that it's called rupturing. Rupturing is like, that's the mage's name for it. That's their official title for it. It's not generally something that most people know about. Instead, they could call it any number of things. They call it straight up teleportation. They could I don't know, like random cool examples for cultural things that they could call it off the top of my head. But you all are very creative writers, so I believe that you would be able to do that. Most people would not know any of the details about rupturing. The only things that they would exactly know are it can take you from one place to another, and usually they'll have very aggrandized ideas or exaggerated ideas of what it is. Like I heard that this magic could be used from anywhere. That an assassin from Nahar could show up in Skalvoris in an instant and slay. Well, I don't know, somebody who's important in Skalvoris, one of the council members probably. And like you get a lot of hearsay and a lot of fear, because generally mages aren't around to be like, nah, actually, that goes against our limit of distance. Most mages don't actually want to tell that to other people. You don't generally want to let them know where your limitations lie. Rupturing mages especially are not as organized of a group, just based on the nature of the spark and the nature of the people that tend to gravitate toward that spark and survive with that spark. They don't tend to trade a lot of notes. So they just go from place to place. So these are things that are looked at as wondrous. The only true myth that passes is the doorway, because that is a hallmark of rupturing. It's the sound and it's the light. Create this bright doorway from one place to another, this wondrous tear in reality. And that tends to stick with people, even if all the other details don't. Let's see. Can a rupture be used as a catalyst to open a portal to somewhere or something of great power? That's a good question. I'm not sure I completely understand. Hold on, let me see if that's explained a little later. The person who asked that, could you clarify a slight bit? And then I'll pop back to that one. How can attunement be used to impact the use of scrying? For example, normally with the portals, you must have physically been in the area before in order to travel there. Rupturing, would knowing a frequency and scrying an individual allow you to open up their location? It would allow you to open scrying locations, absolutely. And depending on how well and how high your attunement is, you could then also attempt to open a portal at their location. Generally, it's not possible and certainly should not be risked. Rupturing doesn't like to be used in shortcuts. If you have never been somewhere before, it usually doesn't want you to go there unless you travel there first. However, memorizing the frequency of a target and then scrying on them and finding out when they are, and then teleporting in, viable use of rupturing. Keeping an eye on a loved one from across the world at a high enough level of rupturing, possible. Absolutely. All right, 16. Will Rupturing's revelation and the awakenings change as well, or will it follow the same theme? Well, there are a number of things that changed about Rupturing: the initiation, the consequences of initiation, a lot of new overstepping penalties, and we're working on a guideline for awakenings and mutations that should hopefully be out fairly soon. Oracle is spearheading the project, and I'm just like advising. And hopefully that'll help to clarify a lot of the questions that come up with mutations and things like that. Because I could go on a whole rant about mutations, but I will not, because we don't have time for that kind of a screed. So the Rupturing's revelation has changed, but some of its details remain true. It's still called the Visitant. It is still, it still involves having an active portal within you. Only it's not your entire body. Your entire body is not the portal. Instead, there is this active portal, or an inactive ingress that you can call upon at any time. It's like having the self-nailing, where you have a portal that is focused on you, and you could turn that into a door and have step, like leap through your chest if you wanted to, or you can have things like blast out of it and stuff like that. The Rupturing revelation is a being that is writhed with this flickering, rupturing energy like lightning that courses through them. They tend to vanish and reappear very quickly, moving a little bit like horror movie ghosts sometimes when they're at their worst. They're like almost every other revelation. You are not even remotely human anymore. You might be humanoid, but no one could mistake you for being a member of the mortal race. You are an entirely different creature. However, with the new rewrites that went into Magic, you can temporarily douse that and return to a semblance of yourself before you awoke, or before you revealed, so to say, at the cost of turning down your magic a bit, and you can't hold on to it for very long. But that is a thing that you can do. Let's see. 17. Do you need to have an exit in mind when it's created? If not, what happens when you create? Okay, you do, with the exception of nails. You do need to have an ingress and an egress in mind when you create the portal. Otherwise it just can't happen. You can't open a door to nowhere. To open the door, it must have another side. In the space between two portals, if two rupturers collide between their locations, that's not really a thing that happens. It's not that you enter into a slipstream, an alternate reality where you're traveling at hyper speeds and you could theoretically run into each other. You are creating a doorway. There is, according to some of the overstepping penalties, there is conjecture that there is a realm somewhere between these portals that you temporarily pass through. But it is undetermined how that realm exactly works, only that there are things in that realm. There's a new set of overstepping penalties in Rupturing, called, I believe, I don't remember the first name of it, but it's essentially like the creeping, the hunting, and then the capture. At first, it's a very minor thing. When you step through a portal and you get the weirdest sense that something was watching you. Um, Something between point A and point B saw you, and you have this weird paranoia around your portals for a little while. And as long as you don't do anything about it, and I mean, like in the sense that you don't teleport, that feeling eventually goes away. However, if you continue to use portals, it will move up into its next level, which is a medium overstepping, which is hunting. And that is when you definitely have the impression that something is getting very close to you. Every time you open a portal, it's right there. You only flicker through the doorways just a second or a millisecond before it might have grabbed you. You get flashes of it, but everybody describes something different. And it never follows you out of the portal, but it is certainly close enough to make things dangerous. You might come through and find that you have a cut on your arm as the long claws pared your skin down towards the bone. Your clothes might be torn as if something had grabbed it for an instant. And then if you continue to test, then you get to the capture. And something pulls you back in to that space between the portals, and no one knows what happens after. So be careful, guys. But you cannot collide between their locations. You're not actually physically being sent through crazy through like a crazy like tube or in the sense of like you're just being like jettisoned that far. You are literally opening a door in one place and another door is opening in another place, and you are simply stepping, like folding space. But that's a little sciencey. All right. 19. Does rupturing attract attention from the inhabitants of EMEA? Well, that's a very good question. Technically, no. It's not something that rupturers have noticed. Any use of magic around a fracture generally attract attention, but it's not as though randomly in the middle of a city or something like that you'd be expecting to run into a creature that's tracked you down or like suddenly just appears this Emean beast. However, there is, again, that overstepping penalty. And so is that an Emean creature? Is it all the same kind of creature? Or unfortunately, it hasn't been solved. It hasn't been discovered. Nobody has used themselves as a human guinea pig enough to try to figure that out and survived. All right. If one has been to the Misty Miasma, could they open a portal there? As a place does not stay in one place. No, but that's also because the distance between this world and that world is in completely different leagues than the way that rupturing understands. You can't really memorize or attune a location from a dream and then teleport in there from rupturing. Breaching the barrier between the worlds is apparently possible in terms of rupturing, but also a mistake. Always a mistake. Always the spark taking too much of a liberty, and bad things happen. And it's not the only weird portal it can open. There's also transtemporal portals. That, yes, you can open a portal through time. Every time I say that, I think of the intro to Samurai Jack. Anyways, you can accidentally tear a portal through time, age yourself accidentally, do these sorts of things that will essentially hyper age you. Now, it doesn't. If rupturers are thrown forward or backwards in time, whatever happens to them, nobody really knows. Usually what happens is you might open a portal that will advance your aging a significant degree, or you might actually get way younger all of a sudden. Just suddenly, bam. I mean, it's a heavy overstepping penalty, so you have to doing something kind of crazy for it to happen that way. It's a mistake. Again, rupturing is the travel between 2 points. Technically, everyone has been to EMEA if you've dreamed, so that's why it can go to EMEA. And technically, you have traveled through time, so it can go through time. It's just that sometimes it'll also advance. Sometimes it'll advance your age, and sometimes it'll de-age you. Either way, it's a mistake, and it's not a thing that anybody has been able to replicate. And frankly, the people that try don't end up okay. 21. How stable will portals be in the new version? How easily can they be forcibly closed, especially combat? So, a portal has its edge. Its most vulnerable point is the edges of where it is torn. You can throw any number of things through a portal; it won't do anything to it. But if you attack the edges of the portal, you can collapse it by disrupting its energy, by forcing it to kind of fall apart. It is not, I would say, it is not the most easy to do, but it is something that anyone could do. If you take a sword and swipe it through a portal, you're likely to end up losing that sword. As portals in this version, in the old, if a portal closed like halfway between you being in one place and another, you like cut in half, lightsaber style. That's not the way it works now. Portals, again, not used to kill people. If it is a sapient being, and the portals can somehow sense that, it's more maybe that your spark can sense that, they are thrown either through the egress or drawn back through the ingress, depending on how far they are through. If you're like 3/4 of the way through a portal, you'll show up at the other end of the portal. If you're only like 1/4 of the way, you'll just be bounced back the way that you came. Is essentially it works if the portal closes. But if it is just an object and not like a magic or enchanted object or anything like that, that one does just get cut. So you could do that with your sword, but your sword is not going to be okay after that. For the most part, it's going to be, half of it's going to be in one place, the other half's going to be in another. So let's see, where was I? Yes, in terms of the stability of portals, there will be time in the write-up for about how long that you can maintain them, and apart from that, disrupting them in the middle of combat. The portals that most mages use in combat, I'd say, are either snapshot portals, which is a new novice technique with rupturing, sky stepping portals, which allows you to essentially just run through the air by opening portals just over the ground and opening a lot of quick portals just over the ground. So you essentially step into one portal, you're on the ground, step, 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 step. Nails are used in combat, and mostly blinking. And blinking is kind of like the messiest portals of all. You instinctively establish where the egress is going to be. And the ingress is wherever you tear your hand or your fingers or anything like that. So like your blinking is always something. So the idea that a rupturer could, from a still standing position, blink to right behind you is not exactly true. If they are moving, they can, because they technically have to move through a doorway to do it. So rupturing is a very mobile magic. You swipe and draw yourself through. Now it's still pretty much almost instantaneous. It's those portals are open for moments at a time. And anybody who's fool enough to try to follow a rupturer through a blink portal is likely to lose any object they push through it, or just be thrown back on their ass. All right. 22. Mentioned people being in the know about rupturing extension magic. Craft jails that are warded to prevent escape or scrying, with the extremely small percentage of the population being mages and even less being rupturers. Would you consider the people in the know with the means and knowledge to establish wards to be extremely rare? Yes. They would be, actually. Only an ensorceler. I don't know where that word's going. Only someone with ensorceling who does not have a spark is able to craft wards. And you only gain ensorceling by being exposed to an offensive use of magic. You get caught in a fireball. You get nearly eaten by a zombie. You get exposed to raw ether or purposed ether in a dangerous and possibly fatal way. And most people don't develop ensorceling, but some of them do. And it's their own soul essentially trying to protect themselves. And that's what essentially allows them to do it. Ensorceling is strange. For non-mages, a terrifying encounter with magic kind of opens up to them a world that they hear about in dreams. They learn their techniques after they have awoken. They sort of unconsciously understand how to move things and shift them as though their soul were reaching out through Emiya in the dark of their dreaming and contacting something that knows how to fight back. And if you're a mage, ensorceling is simply the spark finding new ways to apply itself and its magic to the world in general, because all the spark wants to do, and this is for all of you mages, all it wants to do is to get bigger and exist harder. It wants to be awake. It wants to be powerful. It wants to be a fraction of what it was before. And so it will take any opportunity that it can, vis-a-vis mutations and ensorceling, to expand its influence and its power. All right, with a sample of 100, how many people on average rupturing? Less than 1. Yeah. Sample size of 100. You could take a sampling, a lot of samplings. Sure, you could take a sampling of 100. Not a lot of them would be mages. Again, mage. Being a mage is hard to do. We have a lot of PCs that are interested in it, and absolutely every PC is not, all the PCs are not barred from being mages, because this is your story. You are technically the special character within the story. Of course, you gain access to something that ordinarily wouldn't be available to you if you're just an average person. All PCs have the opportunity to awaken. Most mages can't reveal, incidentally. They don't have the potential to. Even at the heights of their power, they can get to expertise, maybe mastery, and a very, very, very few can ever be revealed. It's just a truth. That's why there's so little that is known about the revealing, and why there aren't a bunch of them running around, and the few that are nightmares. They're rare. They don't happen often. As a PC, of course, you can. The PCs always can. But most of the NPCs that you deal with in the world could not and would not, even if they wanted to. Okay. Okay, can one with enough power port a building or location? Well, since you can't portal through solid objects, generally no, but you can open a portal in or around water. So if your ship was small enough, or if you opened a rend, say, yeah, you could sail a ship through a rend and teleport it. A building, it would depend on if you had the power to then draw the building through the portal. It's not like you can summon the portal and then like push it through the building and then the building will show up somewhere else. The building has to be moving of its own volition and able to travel through the portal itself. But then it's just a matter of size. And Rend is the biggest portal you can have at Revelation. And that is absolutely possible. 25. How would one be able to better explore the realm between portals? Can you portal to the realm between portals? No, you cannot. At least not currently. It's because it's not a location that anyone is in long enough to establish that it is even there. Is it part of Emiya? Is it a realm between EMEA? Is it the beneath? These things aren't determined because you're in that because you're in that realm for such a split moment of time that your mind does not conceive of it. And if the spark thought it was important, it certainly isn't telling you. 26. If you fail to form an entrance or an exit, does the portal simply fail to form? Yeah, your portal will simply fail. See, the question of if you fail to form an entrance or an exit, as soon as the process of opening a portal for a mage. If I was a mage, I would basically through my vision. Portals are a rupturing is a very sight-based practice. Another change that comes with the magic is that rupturers' eyes are well protected. As long as even a portion of their eyes remain, they will always regenerate, because that is what the magic uses to act through, is sight. That does also mean that if you were blind and given the rupturing spark, you will be made to see. The failure won't use up. Can't pull up the portal, then you didn't spend it in the first place. It's not like you open up the entrance and then you open up the exit. That only works in one case, and that's the nail. And really, you are just choosing the place where the nail exits. You've already put like the basics in place, and it's not like the portal is there like shimmering underneath in the nail. It's like you put the promise of that spell, you put the rupturing energy, you put your link in at that location, and then you just open up the end of it. And when you open up the end of it, the door opens for the beginning of it. The ingress opens when the egress opens. They always open at the exact same time. Let's see. 27. So we'll need location knowledge to warp somewhere, or is providing proof we've been somewhere good enough? Always my suggestion is to ask for a location-based knowledge, but that's because in terms of lores, I've seen so many that seem incredibly pointless, that there's always room, in my opinion, to throw in a location-based lore. But if you can prove to if anybody asks you, like, have you really been here before? If you can just like point at a thread or a time, you're like, yeah, I would have been, then that's fine. And this limitation does not apply to like every spot of land. You don't have to walk over every inch of land in order to teleport to it. If you are physically in a field, you can teleport to the end of that field. If you are physically in a city, you can teleport line of sight. It's like, even if you haven't been up in that bell tower before, you can go up to that bell tower because you're technically there. Let's see. Oh, I was scrolling down, and I bet people are just... No, scrolling down is still a good decision. 28. How do phases of matter besides solid interact with ingress and egresses, liquids, gases, vacuum? That's a good question. I was actually talking to Oracle about that earlier. It's like, do you think you should be able to open portals in water? Is that a thing? And in the end, I decided yes, you can, because it's not exactly a solid. You can't open portals in solids, but saying that you couldn't open a portal in the water would be like saying, like, sorry about you, Mer. This magic's not for you. So you can open a portal in water. You can open a portal in smoke. And as soon as you establish the entrance, as soon as you establish the ingress and the egress, you automatically begin interacting with the world. You automatically begin interacting with the world on the other side. So if there's smoke on the other side, it'll start to drift through. Now, some people might ask, and have asked before, does that mean that I could open a scrying portal and then use empathy through it? And generally speaking, no, because the scrying portal is so weak that it only allows sound and sight to pass through it, but trying to pass ether through it, your own influence, etc., even standing next to an an ingress and an egress and trying to manipulate somebody through the other side, it doesn't work. Your other spark does not recognize that as a distance that makes sense to them. You opened a portal across town, and there's a person there that you want to fill with fear. However, your empathy spark still thinks that it is across town, and it does not recognize passing through that realm and as anything else. So you have to physically do that. There are ways that you can mutate in tandem with magic, and like a tandem mutation is when your mutation will generally have aspects of two magics within it, which is your sparks communicating with each other. Can make some very interesting combinations. I think, Alistair, you're right. We don't have a single revealed mage. That was you almost for a very temporary amount of time. And then not so much anymore. You pulled it back, buddy. Which, frankly, wise decision. Wise call. All right. 29. Is there ever a point where a rupturer misfires, meaning the location they appear in wasn't the one they were trying to get to? Yeah, that's overstepping. There are sometimes your portals will open into places you didn't expect. Sometimes your portals will do even more terrible things to you. Transcorpus is the meanest thing. Okay, so I want to describe two other overstepping penalties: transcorpus and collocation. Collocation is a moderate overstepping. So collocation is a moderate overstepping where you think you're stepping through the portal, but something gets confused and your consciousness steps through the portal and your body stays on the other side. And so suddenly you're in two places at once. Collocation. Your body is dead to the world in a coma, and your spirit, soul, it's hard to know, your consciousness is on the other side of the portal, being able to see but not necessarily feel, and it is a terrifying prospect. And it just happens sometimes, and it's horrible for everybody involved. And there's some interesting stuff that happens in collocation, like an attuner could feel your frequency from the place where your consciousness is floating, and it had like that it was based around telepathy. You would be directing it into that empty space where the mage is actually screaming but has no mouth. And then transcorpus. Transcorpus is a major overstepping, up there with the other major oversteppings, and it simply doesn't transfer all of you through the portal, and it only happens to you. And maybe you stepped through with two arms, you step out with one. Maybe you step in with all your organs, you step out without a pancreas. Sometimes it's very fatal, and it's hard to know why the spark does that. The study of the spark is that sometimes it can forget when it is too, let's say, ether drunk with power, which is what overstepping basically is. The spark getting kind of ether drunk, and it kind of forgets your human limitations, and it tries to do things without your permission that don't work out well. So it can definitely hamstring itself, hubristically. 30. Will the use of a push or pull also affect the rupture casting it? You were asking that question earlier. Yes, because rupturing is not a power that inures you to the elements or to what pushing and pulling is. You'll notice that rupturing, there are no abilities that cause you to stand completely still. Rupturing is a magic of movement. And so there isn't any part of it that would stop movement. So you will be caught up in the push or pull of your own portals. But that's because rupturing wants you to move anyway, whether you meant it to be harmful to someone else or not. Can we talk about the new witch brand as well? Yeah, absolutely we can. I'm pretty sure I remember that. The new witch brand of Rupturing is an ocular brand, where, oh my gosh, I wrote down. Hold on, guys. I definitely wrote this down. I just want to see what the specific. Boop, 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 boop. Do I have it pulled up? Of course I don't have it pulled up. All right. Well, I'm going to wing it. And Oracle, if you want to throw in the more specific language, you can. Rupturing is excited. It wants to move. And so when you look at a distant location, it prepares itself to be cast. And so your eyes suddenly spark with rupturing energy, like small courses of, well, whatever color is essentially in your rupturing portals, across your eyes, as long as you are looking at a distant or a faraway spot. Some rupturers in cities, in order to avoid detection, will kind of look at their feet, will seem like very shy people, but instead they're just trying not to look too far ahead of themselves, and the rupturing spark gets excited, and they see that across their eyes. Rupturing wants to move. It doesn't care, and no spark cares about being detected. It has no conception of society. It only knows itself and what it wants. And so when you look to somewhere far, it is already preparing to make the jump there. It's already preparing to unspool itself, to coil through your skin and your muscles and your bones and tear its way through the air. 32. You mentioned the soul protects a person from having a within them. Does this mean a soulless creature or animal can be cut by a portal closure? An animal generates its own kind of life energy. It has a puissance, a presence that the spark recognizes. I suppose if there were ever there is one thing that cut one, like, locomotively, that I can think off the top of my head, thing that you can cut in half with your portals, and those are thralls, necromancer thralls, but only if they don't have a well within. If they have a well within them, they have their own like ether field, and the spark recognizes that as a kind of sapience, and it'll just jettison them. But if they were summoned by the necromancer just like with their own power and they're just puppeting them, you can definitely cut them in half, because they've only got enough ether forming around them to make them move. It's not suffused within them like a well. But apart from that, no, you can't like cut an animal in half with butcher. Its life is like its own soul. All right. 33, piggybacking one question on 29, has a rupturer ever been killed by their own portal, or is that more of an overstep? That is almost certainly an overstep, unless you are a moron and tried to portal into some, like, you portaled yourself onto man, I can't think of a thing where you'd be like completely messed up. Only like if you portaled yourself through the air and I guess into like the way of a bunch of arrows accidentally, then that sucks. If you accidentally blink yourself in spear, it does happen. Remember, it's very instinctive. You're throwing yourself into one location, and if you didn't actually know that someone was throwing something and it would have missed somebody else and been in that location, like, accidents happen. But overstepping is pretty much when a portal kills a rupturer. What is the more specific mechanic of simple rupturing? Body and then into the space where you're creating the portal. The ether collects around your around your hand, and then it also travels out. So your hand or whatever you are using to open the portal, whether you are kicking a portal open, whether you are slashing a portal open with your hand, whether any other way that you might tear your way through motion through the air, and the ether also flows out to the other location. It just flies out. So like ether feels like a wind sometimes when a lot of it is collected. So in a high fly battle with mages, especially with rupturing, you will feel the wind pass you. That does mean that somebody who's very experienced fighting rupturers might know when a portal is going to end up somewhere behind them, or possibly see or possibly have a basic idea of where it might be going. But ether is a wind that you feel, not a wind that affects the world. So you won't see the grass move, but you might feel it if you are attuned to it. The ingress for basic portals, yes, the ingress must always be within physical reach. You have to open it. Rupturing is a magic of tearing. And so even at like mastery, you are still technically tearing. Now, at a novice, you'll see the mages actually rip their hands through the air. And some of them honestly still like the flourish of it. Although masters can control their movements, where a very small movement will cause the effect that they want because they've just simply become so adept at tearing the air open. But in most cases, except for like in the case of like a nail, ingress has to be to you. However, there are differences. You can also be within, I'd say, a certain range of you, a certain site-based range, but it will always depend on you tearing, and your ether will fly out and make the rend. So it's a good question. I should probably put in what the max distance of where an ingress could open is. It'll always be sight, obviously. The ingress always has to be in your own sight. If you don't see where you're opening the portal, you can't create the opening. The egress can be somewhere you don't see at that moment, depending on if it's a place that you've been before or a place that you just recently scryed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You'll be able to open the egress about wherever you need it to be, but the ingress has to be within perceptive distance. And I've made it all the way to the end of all of your questions. How am I doing? Oh, I had to turn off the fan because it's loud and we're recording this, and it's summery times and my house air conditioning's not working, so I'm hot. Yeah, the next magic that is on the next two things that are on the plate are, I suppose, three things if you count me helping Oracle with the mutation guidelines. So there's mutation guidelines. There are some minor edits to Defiance. I have to add in the crux to transmutation, their revelation. Work with Harry to finish off ensorceling, and then the aberration rewrite is the next big magic that I have been working on and plan to roll out with next. After aberration is graft, because I have the most of it, and then we'll see from there. All right, 38. Can you give a description of what might describe a standard or stereotypical rupturer? What are the ideals of a rupturer? Sure, I think that I could. Generally, you know you're going to be a rupturer when magic ever finds you. Rupturing is a magic that is so full of a certain presence, a certain personality. The people who want it are all people that worship movement in a way. They want to be more mobile. They want to be more tactile. They want to be able to flit around the battlefield or move from place to place, be in wondrous location after wondrous location. It attracts a type. And that type is rewarded for their interest. A stereotypical rupturer is usually someone who doesn't face for very. If it is their first magic, they are almost always wanderers. Your first magic changes you in a lot of ways that your second and third magic might not be as effective at doing. Your first magic absolutely shifts your outlook in a certain pattern. So most people who have had rupturing first are never content staying in one location. They don't necessarily believe in settling down, and if they did, then it wouldn't be in a job that required them to move from like one certain point to one other certain point endless amounts of time. They would flit around the city, causing any number of new things to happen. Rupturers are explorers. Rupturers are emotional. They tend to be flighty. Not necessarily bad with keeping commitments, but their excitement takes them from place to place and interest to interest. It's almost as if they are teleporting through their thoughts. Some might say that a rupturer appears inattentive. I would say that a rupturer's attention is simply too fast. They must see all things. Their magic needs to see all things so that they understand where they can go and they should be going. And as always, their demeanor is about movement. They are driven, sometimes aimlessly driven, but that's still a sense of being driven. Sometimes they latch on to ideals and see the end point before they even take the first step, and they are enslaved to it. They can't simply teleport to the end, and so they have a path. It's interesting. A rupturer, in my opinion, kind of reads like someone with ADHD and wanderlust. It's just the nature of their power, and they don't have to be confined to one location, so why would they? Their magic is also violent in a certain way. I mean, it doesn't hurt other people, but have to tear the world in order to make it work. So they do tend to be very forward as well. But I think that is all from me on rupturing. Unless there are any other final questions. Aw, thank you. You guys let me do like my favorite thing, which is just talk about magic endlessly, just screed in a general direction. Talk magical theory like all day. I appreciate the well wishes, though. What is the recourse of having the rupture spark removed? What do you mean by recourse? You mean what's the way, or what happens when it's removed? Oh, the backlash. Having any spark removed from is devastating. If it's your first spark and your only spark, your personality will change. It will flux. You will be missing something. If it is a spark that almost was completely awakened, like you were an expert or master mage, it's crippling. It's like missing a piece of yourself. It's like you had a companion that maybe you didn't want, but who was important to you for reasons you can't really describe, suddenly torn away, and nothing feels right anymore. But also, you can't remove sparks super easy. They might. Oh no. No, don't let him ask questions. Don't let us ask questions. Will the rupturer lose the will to travel? Or that is absolutely a possibility for a rupturer that loses their spark. But so few people lose their sparks that it's not something that has been accurately reported. And I can go more into that as we approach does remove a spark, which will be down the line. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening and coming out tonight to just rant and rave about magic. I will definitely do this again for the time that we're doing a release. So it'll be the Aberration rewrite or Ensorceling, depends. Or maybe they'll let me just rant about mutations. I don't think anyone will let me do that, but I will, given the opportunity. Anyways, thanks everyone for your time, and we'll be doing I'll be doing every magic at some point in time. So I hope you can join me for it all and ask me a lot of questions, because that's how I improve the magic, by being asked the hard questions. Thanks everybody. And that's all for me.